It's good to be back home. But before I say anything else, I'd like to wish all of my dear Jewish friends a happy Hanukkah. I learned this little Hanukkah song when I was 5 years old. I grew up in New York. I have a little dreidel, I made it out of clay, and when it's dry and ready, oh dreidel I shall play. Sing along, come on, some of you know the words. I have a little dreidel, I made it out of clay, and when it's dry and ready, oh dreidel I shall play. Oh dreidel, 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 I made you out of clay, and when you're dry and ready, oh dreidel I shall play. So I made it safely back home thanks to the grace of God, the protection of my guardian angel, whose name happens to be Basil, and in the words of Blanche Dubois, the kindness of strangers. On this episode of The Friar Place, some additional highlights from my cross-country road trip living and traveling in an old VW bus called Francis the Friar Truck. So stay tuned. Well, it all started out on the afternoon of November, Friday the 13th. I left the friary in Berkeley, Michigan, heading southward with California as my destination and performing pop-up musical concerts at random outdoor venues like rest areas, campsites, nature preserves, and big store parking lots being my purpose. Well, actually, the purpose was to use the medium of music as an attraction to create places of encounter where anyone of any political, theological, or ideological persuasion could have the opportunity to share in a positive, maybe even joyful, common experience. I just had to do something, anything, to help mitigate all of the negativity our country has been experiencing, and this is what I chose to do. I traveled through and made music at such places as Osceola, Arkansas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, Fort Stockton, and El Paso, Texas, Tucson, and Phoenix, Arizona, Blythe, California, and even some places so obscure and tiny they didn't show up on my Garmin GPS, like Quemado, New Mexico, where I seem to be the only one not wearing any camouflage clothing. Now, of all the various aspects of this journey of mine, it was Thanksgiving weekend that may wind up being the most memorable one for me. It began on the day before Thanksgiving as I was driving the very windy Interstate 10 on my way from El Paso, Texas to Phoenix, Arizona. Cars and trucks and motorhomes were whizzing by me well over the 80 miles per hour speed limit, when I noticed this diminutive Honda Fit traveling well below that. In fact, this car was traveling so slowly that even I had to pass it. Well, to my surprise, the little car sped up, moving over to the left lane, where I could kind of see some people inside waving at me. I thought to myself, what's this all about? Still, once again, I decided to pass it. And while doing so, I noticed that the driver had lowered his window, reached out his arm, waving his hand even more enthusiastically. It was then that I noticed that the arm attached to the waving hand was covered by a brown sleeve with a sewed-on patch at the elbow. The driver passed me once again, then slowing down, only this time his hand was clearly pointing towards the upcoming interstate exit, as if to say, "Follow me," which is exactly what I did. At this point, I welcomed any opportunity to take a break from being buffeted about on I-10. Once off the highway and behind the little Honda Fit, we both stopped at a red light, which is when the driver of the other car opened the car door, got out, and ran right straight toward me. I'd soon find out it was another friar, wearing the same habit I was. Someone I had first met back in the 1980s while I was living at a Catholic worker house in Chicago for indigent people with AIDS. From the stoplight, we moved over to an adjacent gas station, where, upon removing our masks, we immediately recognized each other. Turns out this friar, David Buer, and a visiting friar from El Salvador, Oscar Flores, had been traveling 2 hours to get to a Costco in order to buy Thanksgiving Day groceries for the day shelter for homeless men David was working with for many years, called Poverello House. David asked me at the gas station, "Hey, you want to go shopping with us at Costco?" "Sure," I replied. "Why not?" Now, just a little aside. You see, there's this tongue-in-cheek expression some of us friars sometimes use depending upon the company we're in. It goes like this: Franciscans do all things poorly. And that's exactly what I was thinking as David, Oscar, and I made our way through a very, very crowded Costco, doing major Thanksgiving Day grocery shopping on the day right before Thanksgiving.
Idea is that let's rush through this as fast as we can. Just follow me and we'll get through this.
Okay.
I've shopped here for years, so I kind of know the ropes. So.
Following our shopping expedition, David was kind enough to give me a little tour of Tucson, which included visiting not only Poverello House that he was associated with, but also a close-by Catholic worker house called Capilla de Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, where I met the legendary Catholic worker icon Brian Flagg, who's been working there at that Catholic worker house since 1983. But you know, I'm still wondering, what was it that prompted David to flag me off the highway in the first place? Parting company in Tucson, I continued onward toward Phoenix, where I decided to stay at a campground for the weekend. Settled in for the night, Thanksgiving Day Eve, I thought about what kind of special meal I might prepare for myself given the holiday, as well as what kind of musical attraction I might come up with for the campground, all things considered. Well, having only a tiny little kitchen to work with, I decided to keep things simple. Maybe it's a stretch, but don't turkeys come from eggs? Meanwhile, the musical attraction idea I came up with was to decorate the fryer truck for Christmas while playing Christmas carols well into the nighttime of Thanksgiving Day. You see, throughout my trip thus far, people had found the visuals of me in a habit driving something looking like the fryer truck quite the curiosity. By adding lights and a Christmas tree, well, I was only adding to the overall effect. Now, the next day, I discovered that my house battery had died and needed to be replaced. So, since Franciscans do all things poorly, on Black Friday, I went shopping for a replacement at Cabela's Outdoor Recreation Center. Yikes. Later on that day, having finally found and purchased the replacement that I needed, I returned to my campsite, deciding to pass a quiet evening recovering from having had to contend with all the Black Friday shoppers earlier that day. Now, no sooner had I sat down in my little camping chair than I heard the crunching of gravel as I watched an old rusty pickup truck whose bed was full of various odds and ends, all tied down and secured by bungee cords, pull up just a few yards from me. I watched as the occupants, which included an old man with a long white beard, a younger man, and a skinny dog, get out and begin to pitch a small pup tent that they would sleep in that night. From the looks of things and from what I could make out from their faces, no one seemed real happy or at all in any holiday spirit. But only later on in the evening would I hear something coming from their campsite that reminded me both how complex life can be as well as how fortunate and blessed I really am, all while humbling me in no uncertain terms. You see, at some time while my eyes were closed as I was resting in my camping chair, the older guy must have gotten up and gone to the bed of the pickup truck to retrieve an old guitar. What wound up rousing me from my resting state was nothing less than the beautiful music this bearded gentleman was making by gently playing his guitar while humming along as his faithful companion sat at his feet, listening just like the old gramophone record label image. I remember thinking to myself how wonderful it was to be right next door to somebody making live music. Well, the next morning, before breaking camp in order to make my way to California, I debated whether or not to go over to my next-door neighbors and thank the skinny Santa for his beautiful music the night before. Remembering how much I appreciate hearing such things myself, I walked right over to the campsite and I did just that. No doubt hearing the crunching of gravel beneath my feet as I made my way over, the old guitar player looked up and began to look at me. I could tell nothing from the affect of his face. Nothing at all. So, while keeping my distance, I removed my mask, smiled, thanked him for his beautiful music the night before, and asked him if I could take his picture so I'd never forget. Without saying a word, he just nodded, giving me permission. As I left their campsite to take off for California, I said goodbye to both him and the younger man, who had until this time just been staring off into the distance. Then I watched as the younger man's head turned toward me, nodding his head in true cowboy fashion and even breaking a smile. Now a whole lot more happened on my way back to Michigan from California. Like the breakdown, driving through clouds, almost driving off a cliff into the Salt River Canyon, the writing of the very first song inspired by the trip, and much more. Some of which I talk about on little iPhone update videos you can find right here on this channel. And some of which will just have to wait until I've had the time to process it all. So until next time, dear friends, peace and all good.